My name's Gary Stevenson, former trader and people's economist. This is Gary's Economics. Today we're going to talk about housing. Okay, so there's 5 areas we're going to cover about housing. Number 1, why is it so expensive? Number 2, is it going to get more expensive? Number 3, how that affects people. Number 4, who's winning and who's losing. And number 5, what can we do about it? So we're going to go right in with number 1, why is it so expensive? Now, a lot of people tend to believe that the reason housing is expensive is because of the housing planning policy in the local area. A lot of people here in London believe that. But the expensiveness of housing is not a London-specific problem. So I used to work in the city. I worked with people from all over the world. People in Sydney, Australia think housing is expensive because of the local planning problems. People in New York think that. People in Los Angeles think that. People in Tokyo think that. People in Shanghai think that. People in Hong Kong think that. People in Vancouver and Toronto think that. Basically, in all of the big cities all over the world, I could keep going, Mumbai, Rio de Janeiro, everybody thinks that housing is expensive because of the local planning policy in that one city. Once you take a global perspective and you realize that this is happening in most, if not all, of the major cities in the whole world, we have to accept that the expensiveness of housing is not because specifically of London planning policy. So it's a global issue. Housing globally is expensive. Not in all cities. Obviously there are parts of the UK where housing has remained cheaper, but in all the major cities it's happening. So why is this happening? Why is housing in major cities all over the world becoming super expensive? Well, to understand that, we need to take one more broader step back and realize it's not even just housing that has become expensive. In that same period of time, the last 13 years since the financial crisis, most stocks and shares have risen 400, 500%, much more even than housing. Land prices have increased significantly, gold price has increased significantly, even bond prices have gone up. Basically, the price of all assets has increased significantly over that period. So when we understand this, we can see that it's not actually even specific to housing. So first, it's not specific to London, and secondly, it's not even specific to housing. What has happened is there's been a massive increase in basically all long-term assets all over the world. So why has that happened? Well, if you watch my other video, What is Wealth, and if you haven't watched it yet, I recommend you watch it. We talk about wealth inequality increasing significantly and what that does to the price of housing, the price of stocks and shares. So basically, in the last 15 years, 20, 30 years, the period where housing has become much less affordable, we've also seen a massive increase in the share of wealth owned by the very wealthiest people, the top 0.1%, the extremely wealthy families. Now, when wealthy families own assets, that means they get a lot of income from the rest of us because all of those assets give an income, and they tend not to spend that income, they tend to save that income. So as inequality has increased, more and more income has gone from ordinary people to the super rich, and they use that to buy assets. That means we can expect to see, as wealth inequality increases, a fall in the prices of goods and services and wages, because that's what ordinary people spend their money on, and an increase in the price of assets, stocks, shares, land, gold, other precious metals, and importantly, housing. And that's basically what we've seen. As we've seen inequality, wealth inequality that is, increase significantly, we've seen a massive increase in basically the price of broadly all assets. And that's because purchasing power has moved away from ordinary people who buy goods and services, which drives your wages, and towards very wealthy people who buy assets. So if that's what's happening, inequality is pushing the price of assets up, including housing, and goods and services down. Why haven't goods and services prices fallen? Why haven't wages fallen? Well, that's because there's basically 2 effects going on at the same time. Firstly, increasing inequality pushes house prices up and wages down. But secondly, at the same time, since 2008, central banks all over the world have been massively increasing the amount of money in the economy. They've been printing huge amounts of money, pushing it into the economy. I talk about this a lot more in my videos on COVID-19 and money printing. And when central banks print a lot of money, that pushes the price of everything up. So we've got 2 things happening at the same time. On the one hand, increased inequality pushes house prices up and wages down. On the other hand, more money in the system pushes the price of everything up. The net balance is wages and shop prices stay about the same, and house prices and asset prices go through the roof. So the expensiveness of housing is caused by two things happening at the same time. Significantly increased wealth inequality, and it's important to understand we're not talking about income inequality. This is not about doctors and lawyers. This is about wealth going to the super wealthy families who own huge amounts of assets, and at the same time money printing. Wealth inequality pushes house prices up, money printing pushes house prices up, so house prices go through the roof. But at the same time, wealth inequality pushes wages down. So the net effect is house prices go up and your wages stay the same. That is why housing is expensive. Number 2, is housing going to get more expensive? Short answer, yes. If you watch my videos on COVID, you'll see that it's caused a massive increase in both wealth inequality and money printing. That means we can expect to see housing get significantly more unaffordable and expensive in the years ahead. Now, number 3 and number 4. How does this affect you, and who wins and who loses? Now, economists who often come from rich families that own property like to think that when house prices go up, it benefits the economy. People see the house price rise, they feel richer, they spend more money. Homeowners also often like it when they see the value of their houses go up. But who loses out here? Well, the obvious group is young people from poor and ordinary families, right? People from rich families, they can often get significant deposits from their parents, but people from ordinary families, when the house price goes up and the wage doesn't, it can become very difficult or even impossible to buy a property. That means much longer in rented accommodation, which is expensive. And if they are able to save up a deposit, then they'll have to take a much bigger mortgage, which will mean higher repayments over a longer period of time. So younger people are losing money every month because of this more expensive house prices, either through having to pay rent or having to pay a bigger mortgage. When this happens, they can easily respond by thinking, I've got to save up a lot more money, I'll have to spend less, and that can actually damage the economy. But let's talk about older people from ordinary families who may already own their own property. Right? These guys often think that they're winning when house prices go up. But the only way that you can get the money from the house price going up is by selling the property. Now, if you sell your property and spend the money, then that means you can't give your kids money to buy their property. Now, we've already said that when house prices go up, that means kids from rich families can get deposits from their parents, but kids from ordinary families can't, and that means often they can't get property at all. So if you're a parent from an ordinary family, you own your own property, you see the house prices go up and you think you're richer, the only way you can actually get that money is by selling the property, and that's going to mean that your kids and your grandkids will never be able to own property at all. So for ordinary families, they find themselves in a bind where they feel richer because the house price is going up. But the only way for them to actually make that money is to sell the property, which will mean their kids and their grandkids will never own property again. Now, I can see this happening with the families around me. Kids from richer families, their parents are able to remortgage the properties or access the stocks and shares they have to give big deposits to their kids and help them get onto the property ladder. But kids from poorer families, their parents need that money to help them get through retirement. And it means that kids from richer families win, and kids from poorer families end up completely losing access to property forever. So the winners and losers here are rich families who have a lot of property, big portfolios of stocks and shares which are also going up. And the losers are ordinary families who are losing their houses. So as ordinary families lose their properties and kids from richer families are able to buy them, inequality gets even worse, driving house prices up further still. This creates a worsening spiral which makes housing increasingly unaffordable to ordinary people. That brings us to the last thing: how do we fix it? Okay, so what do we do? This problem is caused by inequality, so the only way to fix it is by fixing inequality. Not by taxing ordinary working people, but by taxing the super rich. The government doesn't want you to know this because it's run by people with wealth of 100 million or even sometimes over £1 billion. These people get huge amounts of cash flows from us, ordinary people, to them, which they use to buy houses that our kids need. And often they do it whilst paying almost no tax. This can't continue. We have to end it. Push for wealth taxes on super rich people. Educate yourselves. Watch my videos about COVID and inequality. Watch my videos about what is wealth. Tell your friends, tell your mum. Let's make it happen. At the moment, these guys are profiting from a crisis that is going to keep our economy in the stump for 50 years. There is one other thing they can do with that massive amount of income. They can buy your mum's house.